Most years in the plant world, new introductions are variations on a theme, a slightly different shade of something familiar, a marginally more compact form of something that already existed, a renamed cultivar of something you bought 3 seasons ago under a different label. The marketing describes revolution. The reality delivers incremental adjustment. And experienced gardeners learn to navigate the annual flood of new releases with appropriate skepticism, knowing that genuinely significant introductions, the ones that actually change what is possible in the garden, arrive rarely and deserve serious attention when they do. 2026 is one of those rare years. The 7 perennials on today's list are not variations on themes. They are the result of serious, sustained breeding programs with specific, measurable goals. Programs that spent years, in some cases decades, targeting the qualities that gardeners actually need most in a world where time for garden maintenance is genuinely limited. Not just beauty, though every one of these plants is genuinely beautiful. Not just novelty, though every one of them introduces something that has not been available before. The specific target was low maintenance without performance compromise. Plants that thrive on neglect. That produce spectacular results with minimal intervention. That handle the real conditions of a real garden. The heat waves, the missed waterings, the cold snaps, the weeks when life prevents any garden attention at all, without losing the qualities that made them worth planting. Every one of these introductions has been through rigorous trial garden evaluation before reaching the market. The claims made about their performance are based on documented, replicated results across multiple growing zones and multiple seasons. This is not marketing language dressed up as horticulture. These are plants whose credentials have been tested by conditions rather than described by press releases. Let me take you through all 7. Number 1 is Echinacea solar flare. The history of fancy hybrid echinacea introductions is, for many gardeners, a history of beautiful disappointment. The novelty varieties that appear on plant tags in spectacular colors, vivid oranges, warm corals, rich ambers, are frequently spectacular in their first season and unreliable or outright short-lived in their second and third. The gap between the promise of the tag and the reality of the garden border has become so familiar that many experienced gardeners simply stopped buying novelty coneflowers and returned to the straight species, trading visual excitement for the reliable, multi-year performance that the native Echinacea purpurea provides without asking for anything in return. Echinacea solar flare was bred specifically to close that gap. The breeding program spent over 8 years backcrossing the most visually dramatic orange coral novelty genetics with straight Echinacea purpurea, the original prairie native whose deep taproot, bristly drought-resistant foliage, and proven long-term garden persistence has made it the benchmark for coneflower reliability across zones 3 through 8. The goal was not to compromise on the visual excitement of the novelty coloring. The goal was to bring the native species toughness fully into a variety that carries that exciting color. And the trial garden results indicate that the program succeeded. The flowers of solar flare are genuinely extraordinary. Large, broad-petaled blooms in a progression of orange, coral, and warm amber that shifts through the bloom season as individual flowers age, creating a multi-tonal sunset palette display on a single established plant. The raised center cone deepens from pale gold to rich orange-brown as the season advances, intensifying the warm-toned composition with a natural progression that no single static color can match. It is a visually dynamic plant, different in July than it is in August, different in the morning light than it is in afternoon. And that dynamism is part of what makes it so photographically compelling and so rewarding to actually live with. The low-maintenance credentials are rooted directly in the native species genetics. The taproot system is deep and independently drought-sustaining. Once established through the first season, it mines moisture from the soil with an efficiency that makes the plant genuinely tolerant of the missed waterings and dry spells that a neglect-tolerant plant must handle without flinching. No deadheading is required for continued bloom production. The plant self-manages its bloom cycle with the same reliability as straight Echinacea purpurea. Deer and rabbit resistance from that characteristic, slightly bristly foliage texture is fully present. The plant self-seeds modestly, producing offspring that carry the warm color genetics with natural variation and gradually filling the border around the parent plant in a way that looks completely naturalistic. Bloom season runs 8 to 10 weeks from midsummer through early autumn. Cold hardy to Zone 3. Multi-year persistent in trial gardens from Zone 3 through Zone 8 with the kind of second and third year performance escalation. More stems, more flowers, more established presence that defines a genuine perennial rather than a beautiful annual masquerading as one. The first season is establishment season. Plant in full sun in well-drained soil and water consistently through the first summer. That is the investment. From year 2 onward, Solar Flare operates on the strength of that taproot and asks almost nothing from the gardener in exchange for an increasingly spectacular display. Number 2 is Salvia nemorosa Marathon. Ornamental salvia is already one of the most low-maintenance perennials available to gardeners in zones 4 through 8. Drought-tolerant once established, deer-resistant, self-supporting without staking, naturally compact, and producing those richly colored, upright flower spikes across multiple flushes through a managed cutback cycle. It is as close to a perfect low-maintenance perennial as the sunny border offers. The one limitation, the single management task that determines how continuously beautiful a salvia container or border planting remains through the season, is the post-flush cutback. The gardener who remembers to cut back after each flush gets 3 generous seasons of bloom. The gardener whose schedule doesn't always accommodate that task gets a plant that looks spent and untidy between flushes. Salvia Marathon was bred to address exactly that limitation. The breeding innovation targets the flower senescence cycle, the internal timeline between when a spent flower stem begins declining and when the plant initiates new bloom buds at the same node. In standard ornamental salvia varieties, that cycle runs 3 to 4 weeks, meaning that a post-flush cutback is rewarded with new bloom in 3 to 4 weeks. Marathon's breeding work has compressed that cycle to approximately 10 to 14 days. The plant relooms almost twice as quickly after the spent flush is removed, and in practice, the difference is experienced as a bloom sequence that feels genuinely continuous rather than episodic. The color compounds the excitement. Marathon's flower spikes are a particularly rich, deep, near indigo violet blue, darker and more jewel-like than Caradonna, more blue-violet than Maynight, produced on characteristically dark stems that create the sophisticated contrast that made Caradonna one of the most celebrated salvia introductions of the past 2 decades. Compact at 18 to 22 inches, strongly self-supporting through wind and rain, naturally tidy in its growth habit without pruning between cutbacks. For the gardener who wants the most low-maintenance approach possible, Marathon's faster rebloom cycle means that even irregular cutback timing, a few days late here, a few days late there, produces less visible decline between flushes than standard varieties experience under the same management. The plant's internal rebloom momentum is strong enough to compensate for imprecise timing in a way that previous varieties don't. That forgiveness of irregular management is precisely the quality that a genuinely neglect-tolerant plant needs to have. Cold hardy to Zone 4, full drought tolerance once established, complete deer and rabbit resistance. The full toughness package of established ornamental salvia genetics carried into the most bloom-continuous and most richly colored variety yet introduced. Number 3 is Nepeta Blue Storm. The catmint varieties that have been available to gardeners for the past 2 decades, Walker's Low, Six Hills Giant, Junior Walker, represent genuinely excellent plants. Low maintenance, drought tolerant, long blooming, fragrant, deer resistant, and producing that characteristic soft, hazy, lavender blue display that works in virtually every garden style and virtually every color combination. They are reliable, they are beautiful, and for most gardens, they have been completely adequate. Blue Storm was introduced because adequate is not the same as exceptional, and the specific qualities that Blue Storm's breeding program targeted, denser flower spike architecture and more saturated flower color, represent a meaningful upgrade over existing catmint varieties rather than a cosmetic adjustment. Standard catmint varieties produce flower spikes in which individual florets are spaced somewhat loosely along the stem, creating that characteristic soft, hazy effect. Bluestorm's selected genetics produce more densely packed floret arrangements on each spike, with a richer, more saturated blue-violet color in each individual floret. The cumulative effect is a first flush display that is visually denser, more immediately impactful, and more vividly colored than the most celebrated existing varieties. Where Walker's Low produces a soft lavender haze, Bluestorm produces something closer to a vivid blue-violet wave. The same plant family, the same billowing, mounding habit, but with a color intensity and a flower density that reads as noticeably more impressive from across a garden. The toughness credentials are fully intact and in one respect extended. Cold hardy to Zone 3, heat tolerant through Zone 9 in trial gardens, with the full drought tolerance and deer resistance of the Nepeta genus. The zone range extension. Walker's Low is reliably hardy to Zone 4, expands Bluestorm's usefulness to the coldest gardens, where catmint's particular combination of low maintenance and long bloom season is most needed and has previously been unavailable. The post-flush cutback that unlocks catmint's multi-season rebloom performance remains the one seasonal management task. Cut back by half after the first flush finishes, and Bluestorm rebounds with that second, dense wave of richer color in 3 to 4 weeks. A lighter trim after the second flush encourages a third performance in early autumn. 3 seasons of bloom, 3 brief cutbacks. A plant that handles everything else: heat, drought, cold, deer, disease, with complete independence. Number 4 is Rudbeckia Goldstrom Ultra. Goldstrom has been the default answer to low-maintenance midsummer color for decades, and legitimately so. 10 to 14 continuous weeks of golden bloom from midsummer through October without deadheading, Zone 3 through 9 cold hardiness, and a self-sustaining rhizomatous spread that builds border and container presence more generously every passing season. The low-maintenance case for standard Goldstrom is as strong as any perennial on the market. Goldstrom Ultra improves that case in the 2 specific areas where the original has consistently shown its limitations. The first is powdery mildew. In the hot, humid gardens of zones 5 through 8, particularly the American Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Upper Midwest, standard Goldstrom develops powdery mildew on its foliage in late summer with a regularity that attentive growers have learned to simply accept. It rarely kills the plant, but a border performing at its golden visual peak while its foliage looks diseased is a frustration that meaningfully compromises the low-maintenance experience Goldstrom is supposed to deliver. Goldstrom Ultra's mildew resistance comes from a targeted crossing with Rudbeckia subtomentosa, the sweet black-eyed Susan, whose slightly downy leaf surface provides significantly improved fungal resistance. Trial garden results in high humidity locations show a 60 to 70% reduction in powdery mildew incidence compared to standard Goldstrom in identical conditions. For humid climate gardeners who have managed this problem for years, that improvement is the most meaningful upgrade in a black-eyed Susan introduction to date. The second improvement addresses the brief mid-season bloom density slump that observant Goldstrom growers notice in August, a slight gap between the initial peak and the second wave. Goldstrom Ultra's selected genetics maintain flower production more evenly through that window, creating a genuinely uninterrupted bloom experience across the full season. Everything else that made Goldstrom the standard remains intact. Ultra simply removes its 2 persistent frustrations and hands the result back to the gardener as the most complete, low-maintenance black-eyed Susan available. Number 5 is Agastache Heatwave Coral. Agastache has always promised more than most of its varieties could deliver in the gardens that needed it most. The ecological generosity, hummingbirds, bees, butterflies mobbing the plants from midsummer through hard frost, the vivid, warm flower colors, the aromatic foliage, the extraordinarily long bloom season. All of it compelling, all of it performing beautifully in the dry heat of the American Southwest and in the moderate Pacific Northwest climates. and all of it struggling persistently in the hot, humid southeast and mid-Atlantic gardens of zones 7 and 8, where summer heat and summer rainfall combine into conditions that have defeated variety after variety. Heatwave coral was developed specifically for those gardens. The breeding program crossed Agastache aurantiaca, native to hot, humid mountain valleys in Oaxaca, with cold-hardy Agastache rupestris selections. The Mexican parent contributes genuine deep south heat and humidity tolerance. The rupestris parent contributes improved cold hardiness. The result achieves Zone 5 through Zone 10 reliability that is unprecedented in the Agastache world, a variety that treats hot, humid southeastern conditions as its preferred environment. The coral orange flower color sits at the precise visual frequency that triggers the strongest feeding response in ruby-throated hummingbirds, the primary hummingbird species of the eastern United States where this introduction matters most. Documented hummingbird visitation rates in Zone 7 and 8 trial gardens exceed those of comparable orange-flowered Agastache plantings significantly. The bloom season extends from midsummer through hard frost, up to 18 continuous weeks in the mildest Zone 8 gardens, maintained through brutal August heat and humidity without the stalling that defeats previous varieties. Zero deadheading required throughout. Full sun and excellent drainage are the two conditions that unlock everything heatwave coral promises. Meet those conditions, and it delivers a self-managing, wildlife-filled, coral-blooming display that carries the garden through autumn with complete independence. Number 6 is Heuchera Midnight Frost. The darkest coral bells varieties have always carried a specific and consistent disappointment. The near-black, deep burgundy foliage that makes them so visually dramatic in spring fades toward brown-green by midsummer. The anthocyanin pigmentation that creates those extraordinary dark colors proving photochemically unstable in intense summer sun. The variety that looked spectacular in May looks ordinary by July. Additionally, the darkest varieties have tended toward reduced cold hardiness, limiting their reliability in Zone 5 and colder gardens. Midnight Frost solves both problems through breeding focused specifically on anthocyanin stability. The genetic selection maintains true near-black foliage through the entire growing season, including the most intense summer sun, eliminating the fade that has defined the dark Heuchera experience for a decade. The frost element describes a silvery, iridescent overlay on the deep, near-black leaf surface, a metallic shimmer that catches available light and creates a depth and luminosity in the foliage that no previous Heuchera has achieved. In low-angle morning or evening light, the foliage appears almost to glow from within. In practical terms, this is a plant that looks more beautiful in the gentle light of early morning and late afternoon than it does at midday, which means it rewards the moments of quiet garden attention most deeply. Cold hardiness extends to Zone 4, a meaningful improvement over dark varieties that struggle below Zone 5. The crown expansion that makes Heuchera a genuine perennial builder operates fully, producing a progressively fuller, more visually commanding plant with every passing season. Morning sun with afternoon shade protection maintains the most vivid color expression through the hottest weeks. Number 7 is Lavandula Arctic Storm. Arctic Storm closes this list with the most significant advance in lavender cold hardiness ever achieved through conventional breeding. A 17-year program extending reliable lavender cultivation from its traditional Zone 5 starting point all the way to Zone 3, making permanent, multi-year lavender gardening possible in climates considered definitively outside lavender's range until now. The Zone 3 cold hardiness survived -35 degrees Fahrenheit in Minnesota trial gardens without crown protection, a temperature that kills every other available lavender variety, including Phenomenal, the current cold hardiness benchmark at Zone 5. The fragrance retention is what makes Arctic Storm genuinely extraordinary, rather than merely cold hardy. Most cold hardiness breeding in lavender has required diluting aromatic genetics with less fragrant crossing material, producing cold hardy plants that smell like a pale approximation of true lavender. Arctic Storm's volatile oil concentration rates at approximately 85% of the best standard Munstead varieties. For Zone 3 and 4 gardeners who have spent years watching lavender die every winter, That fragrance level represents a real, substantial lavender experience, not a compromise. Compact at 14 to 18 inches, with classic deep purple-violet flower spikes from early summer through midsummer, and reliable secondary bloom after trimming. Silver foliage maintains its mounded form through Zone 3 winters and resurrects with complete confidence each spring. Drainage remains non-negotiable regardless of cold hardiness level. Gritty, fast-draining mix always. Then let Arctic Storm do what 17 years of breeding prepared it to do. 7 introductions, 1 exceptional year. Solar Flare delivering warm-toned coneflower beauty with native species toughness. Marathon relooming in 10 to 14 days and making continuous salvia color genuinely achievable. Blue Storm bringing the richest, densest catmint display to the widest zone range yet. Goldstrom Ultra solving the mildew problem that has qualified standard Goldstrom's low-maintenance credentials in half the country. Heatwave Coral making Agastache's extraordinary wildlife value reliably accessible to the gardens that needed it most. Midnight Frost holding near-black foliage color through summer sun with a frosted, luminescent quality unlike anything previously introduced. Arctic Storm extending true lavender gardening to Zone 3 for the first time in the history of lavender cultivation. Plant them in April. Water through establishment. Then step back and let 7 genuinely exceptional new perennials demonstrate exactly what serious breeding for neglect tolerance produces in a real garden. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.